Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for opening week of Yom Yerushalayim. We begin by wishing all those who are ill in our community and the larger community a refuah shlema, and to express our condolences to all those who have lost loved ones during this very difficult time. We stand together very strongly with our Israeli brothers and sisters, together with all of our community. We want to also thank the amazing work that the health professionals and those on the front lines are doing. It's literally God's work. We wish you continued health and safety. This afternoon, as we open our week of Yom Yerushalayim, we are honored and privileged to have with us Yaakov Katz, who is currently the editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post, where he previously served as the paper's military reporter and defense strategist. He is also the author of Shadow Strikes, Inside Israel's Secret Mission to Eliminate Syrian Nuclear Power, and the co-author of two other books, Weapon Wizards, How Israel Became a High-Tech Military Superpower, and Israel versus Iran, the Shadow War. As prolific as he is as a writer, he is that as a speaker as well, and he has shared his knowledge and insights with the Ramaz and KJ community several times over the past few years. And most notably, he is the uncle of three amazing Ramaz students, Chai, Ayla, and Ravi Katz. We are also privileged to have as our moderator, Dr. Beverly Gribetz, class of, I really don't need to say it, Bev, but class of 69. She has recently retired as the principal of the Evelina de Rothschild-Tehilla, the amalgamation of Evelina de Rothschild Secondary School for Religious Girls, which she headed from 1998 to 2004, and the Tehilla High School, which she founded in 2007. She also, from 1987 to 1996, was the assistant dean of the Ramaz Upper School and our first headmistress for what was then called for the first time the Ramaz Middle School. Beverly gave us the honor of being able to honor her as the Alumni of the Year at our 73rd annual Ramaz dinner. She also has received awards from Solomon Schechter as the Jewish Educator Award from the Jewish Theological Seminary in 2016. And in 2019, she received a special citation from the Jerusalem Board of Education in recognition of her career as a principal. She was also awarded the prestigious Bonei Zion Prize in Education from Nefesh B'Nefesh. So we have two outstanding individuals joining us from Jerusalem. How wonderful it is to open our week this way. Beverly, please begin our talk.
Okay, thank you, Kenny. And welcome to all of the people who joined in for this Zoom that celebrates Jerusalem in the week of Yom Yerushalayim. Although the corona situation is billed as a worldwide epidemic that is in some ways drawing all people in the world together with the same difficulties and the same problems, I think that we understand here in Israel that you in New York and in Westchester and in other places in the United States may be feeling it a little bit more and a little bit differently than we are. And for that, I reiterate what Kenny just said. We express our condolences to people who have lost loved ones and the health workers within the Ramaz community and KJ and outside the Ramaz community. There are no words for the Avodat HaKodesh that you are doing every single day. May you all stay healthy. I have a feeling after a little over a year sitting here in Israel, the feeling was that nothing much was happening in the government, and that all of a sudden this week, everything has started to happen. I spoke to Yaakov on the phone last week once, this morning once, and this afternoon once, and Yaakov probably agrees with me that everything we thought about talking about has changed very rapidly just recently. And that's what we're going to try to explain to all of you. And I'll start with a smaller question before we get to the swearing in of the new government, which is going on right now as we speak. And I want to bring back a memory that people from my generation will remember very, very well. When the Israeli army went to to bring home the people who were hijacked to Entebbe, we were thrilled that we were able to do this because Israel had built the airport in Entebbe, right? And that's why our people knew every in and out and where to turn right and where to turn left, because we had built that airport for them in some kind of international cooperation. Over the last year or so, China has become a player in Israel, buying out more than 50% of Tenuva, our food, and talking about, or already is building our ports in Haifa or in Ashdod. Yaakov will explain this a little bit. I have to say, to me, that gives me the creeps a little bit, and I'm not quite sure why. And Secretary Pompeo came here last week to discuss this with the Prime Minister and the substitute Prime Minister. And then there was a big development today. Yaakov, what's going on with China and Israel?
Well, first of all, let me just say it's a pleasure to be with all of you this week, and Beverly, especially be with you. And Kenny, thank you very much. And Kenny called out my two nieces and nephew who are students at Ramaz, but my brother Mayor and sister-in-law Amanda, who are also members of the KJ community. So it's great to be with everyone once again. I'm sure there's somewhere out there in the crowd. You know, China is interesting, and especially the relationship that it's been developing with Israel. But before we go maybe back in time, just a quick update of what happened this morning. The Chinese ambassador to Israel was found dead in his apartment in Herzliya. And initial police investigations show that this was maybe a natural causes, some heart disease or cardiac arrest overnight. But it's very difficult, you know, to those people who like to live in a Daniel Silva thriller novel, that just last week, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was here in Jerusalem, warned the Israeli authorities about this continued relationship and dance with the Chinese, warning of the repercussions that in fact would have to the close alliance that Israel and the United States share with one another, of sharing intelligence information, military cooperation, and the close diplomatic relationship that the two nations have. And the next day, actually, in our newspaper on Friday online, the Chinese spokesperson kind of hit back at Pompeo, called his remarks absurd, and had this line in his op-ed, which we posted on our website, jpost.com, where he said that the Jewish people have been through these allegations in the past of spreading diseases and things like that, and they will know who to stand with against these lies, basically insinuating that Israel would abandon the United States and prefer to be with the Chinese. And then a couple days later, you find the Chinese ambassador dead in his apartment in Herzliya. So not that, God forbid, am I accusing the United States of any foul play, but just a very interesting coincidence in the timing of all this. But to your bigger question of what's happening between Israel and China, I mean, all you got to do is look what's going on in the country, Beverly, and you see it like I do. You know, all this construction that we've seen over the last few years, right? If you look at the Gilon Tunnel in the north, it cost 600 million shekel, was built by the China Civil Engineering Construction Corporation, right? Another subcontractor did the Carmel Tunnel project for another 450 million shekel. For 1.7 billion shekel, you had the Tel Aviv light rail line, which is also being built by a Chinese company. Ashdod's new port, also built by the Chinese, 3.2 billion shekel. The Haifa port was won in a tender to operate it, also for a couple billion shekel, by another Chinese company. You're looking at approximately 15 to 20 billion shekel, if not more, of projects, Israel's most sensitive infrastructure projects, in addition to Tenuva, which you mentioned, which the Chinese have their hands in. Now, you got to ask yourself, first of all, why do the Chinese want this? And number two is, why would Israel allow this to happen, right? So the Chinese want this because this is part of their bigger kind of strategy, which is to spread all their influence and kind of tentacles throughout the world. One of the ways that they're doing this, they're trying to, it's the Belt and Road Initiative that they've been promoting for a number of years, and you're trying to use it to gain influence in Israel, as well as other places in the Middle East and Africa. In Israel particularly, it wants our technology. But Israel, on the other hand, looks to China as a trading partner, which, unlike Europe, doesn't get stuck on the conflict with the Palestinians, doesn't care about the annexation or about building in so-called settlements or East Jerusalem. All it wants is to do business with Israelis, right? And Israel enjoys that. It enjoys having a trade partner that's not asking too many tough diplomatic questions. But the issue with the United States is that, and I can tell you what one senior U.S. official recently told me, is he said, you know, you guys are not Nigeria or Kenya for us. If the Chinese work there, that's fine. But we share with you information that we don't share with any other country in the world. And we cannot jeopardize that by allowing the Chinese to be here in Israel in a way that could potentially see the leakage of that information, whether it's technological data that the Chinese might want, or intelligence information that's shared with us with the United States. They can't risk and jeopardize having that make its way to China, and that's why they're trying to get us to cut off some of those ties and pick a side almost.
Okay, thank you. Now let's try to explain the new government. We had 3 elections in a little more than a year. There were those who said, now we need a 4th election because we got stuck in the same stalemate that we were in for the past year. But today, a new government is being sworn in with 2 prime ministers, with a whole host of new laws that didn't exist before, but that were passed in order to create this government, with 35 ministers, including some who, in my opinion, aren't going to have that much to do, at a tremendous expense. And this is supposedly a government that is an emergency government because of the corona and the economic crisis that is with us and coming. And it is a unity government in order to heal the wounds of the several difficult campaigns. How is this an emergency government? How is this a unity government? How is it going to work? And is it going to last? That's the first part.
Wow, that's a lot in there packed in. The premise is that, yes, this is something of an emergency government, because when it was established, we were still in the throes of the health crisis caused by the coronavirus, COVID-19. And this was definitely used, the virus and its continued spread and the havoc it was wreaking and impacting on Israel and the world from a health perspective, economically, was the justification for all sides to climb down from the tree they had climbed up to, and to say, for Benny Gantz to be able to say, it's okay, now I can actually sit with Netanyahu, even though I promised a number of times not to sit with him. And I can tell you, I met with him just about 2 weeks before he announced that he was going into the government with Netanyahu. And he had a phone call with Bibi just a couple days before, and it went really bad, and that was kind of the end of any of these negotiations. And I said to him, but didn't you know that you can't trust him? He said, I will never believe a word the man says. He's a complete liar. You can't trust a word that Netanyahu says. And then 2 weeks later, suddenly they're the best of friends, right? They're going into government together. So, you're probably familiar, Beverly, with that saying that is attributed to Ariel Sharon back when he was prime minister, Ma sheroim mikan lo roim misham, right? What you see from here, you don't necessarily see from there. And that was what Sharon said at the time when he was moving forward with the unilateral withdrawal, known as the disengagement from the Gaza Strip in the summer of 2005, after having been what they called the father of the settlement enterprise, right? How did he make that 180? But I think Gantz, to some extent, recognized that. The health crisis did create this urgency that we needed to get our act together as a country, but it also made him realize that he really didn't have a real political survival plan in place. And if he didn't do something now to go into the government, if he were to go to a fourth election, that could potentially be the end of him and this so-called, I would call it a little sortie into Israeli politics. He hasn't functioned well as a politician. I mean, he's done well in the sense that look at what he's gotten out of this, but if we had gone to a fourth election, all predictions and all polls kind of showed that he would be close to disappearing. So I think that this was first and foremost very much a need for survival for Benny Gantz. For Netanyahu, it was also something along those lines, because while on the one hand, Netanyahu was very tempted a couple of weeks ago to go to a fourth election because he saw how he was rising in the polls. Israel has fared well throughout this health crisis. I think there's a lot of reasons why that don't necessarily have to do with just his decisions, right? We could get into that maybe later, but we've done well, thankfully. And his polling and his approval ratings were going up. He was over 75% at one point. So he was tempted, and polls showed, we took a poll, for example, a couple of weeks ago that showed that he would get over 40, I think he would get 42 seats if there were to be another election. And the bloc, the so-called right-wing bloc, which includes Likud, the Yamina party led by Bennett, Yadut HaTorah led by Litzman, and Shas led by Aryeh Deri, would have led to him getting about 65 seats. So he would have had the more than 61 that he would need. He'd be able to pass all the legislation that would give him immunity for life. He would never be able to stand trial. Remember, his trial begins a week from today, right? A week from today, Israel will make history once again, because we don't do that enough. And we'll have a prime minister who will be standing trial on Salah ad-Din Street at the Jerusalem District Courts in East Jerusalem. But if we put that aside for a moment, even as difficult as that might be, he was concerned ultimately that if he did go to another election, you know how you go into an election, but you don't know how you come out of it. And the economic crisis that Israel's now finding itself in, we're looking at a negative growth potentially in the year to come, after years of having 4% growth and plus. The unemployment rate is still at about 25%. We still have nearly 1 million Israelis who are out of jobs. This was something that he was concerned could backfire and would actually lead to him losing an election. So they both this was a marriage of convenience. They both needed each other for survival. Now, the problem with this government, though, is that while we have 1 million Israelis who are out of jobs, people who are slipping below the poverty line, right? Sadly, as an employer, I myself have had to, throughout this crisis, have had to put people on unpaid leave, have had to lay off some members of my staff. I mean, this has been a crisis, as everyone on this call is familiar with, no matter where you are in the world, this has been a very complicated reality for many different people. We have a government now that the most important assignment for it was to create jobs for itself. We have 34 ministers, 16 deputy ministers. We have a ministry now that's called the Alternate Prime Minister Ministry, right? Because Benny Gantz, who's defense minister, he's got a huge office at the defense ministry, a huge staff. He's got a huge office in the Knesset. He needs a third ministry with a whole staff. Each of these ministries cost millions and millions of shekels. You have Zev Elkin, who used to be the environment minister. He's now going to be the higher education minister, the water resources minister, and he's going to be in charge of Yad Vashem. Now, if someone could explain to me what water, college, and the Holocaust have to do with one another, right? As a minister, I mean, we could all make jokes, but come on, right? You have you have Tzipi Chotovelli, who's becoming the settlement affairs minister. You have all these other made-up ministries that are going on. And unfortunately, my criticism would be that this is not what a government is meant to do. A government is meant to worry and work for the people that elected it. We have over 1 million people, again, out of jobs in this country. We're 9 million people. That is a significant percentage of this country. That should be the first and foremost job of this government, and not worrying about creating jobs for themselves. Will it last, though, to the last part of the question? I would guess that today that you're asking me, my answer, my hunch and my guess would be that it will last. It will last at least for 18 months, which is until November 2021. Because after 18 months, according to the agreement between Blue and White and Likud, there's supposed to be a rotation. Netanyahu is supposed to rotate out of the prime minister's office, and Benny Gantz is supposed to rotate in. Benny Gantz, at this stage, we'll start with him. His focus is singular at this moment. He has one single objective: to get into that office of the prime minister. He needs to become prime minister. If he can become prime minister, everything else that he has done will be okay, right? It will be forgotten. The road to hell is paved with whatever the term is. Everything is justified as long as he can make his way to the prime minister office, because then he figures people will forget about all this bad stuff, and they'll remember that he was the guy who was able to remove Benjamin Netanyahu after 11 years of him being prime minister. And with that could catapult him into the next election that will come at some point later on. For Netanyahu definitely wants to get to those 18 months because he's going to be on trial. And he wants to stay prime minister during his trial. His greatest concern is to lose office while standing trial and to just be a regular guy who's standing trial. He remembers what happened to Ehud Olmert. Ehud Olmert stepped down as prime minister, went to court for corruption, and eventually went to jail. Netanyahu does not want to let that happen. He needs to go to court from a position of power. So as long as he can stay in power, that's what it's about. Now, where will we be 18 months from now? Will the trial have been over, or will it still be going on? That will determine whether he abides by the agreement and rotates out, or he doesn't abide by the agreement, he breaks it up, we go to a new election.
I just remind us that it was Netanyahu who suggested to Olmert that once he was under indictment and going to trial, the right thing to do was to step down.
But I'll also remind you, I'll remind us as well, that Olmert did not step down before there was an indictment against him. Before there was even forget about trial. He wasn't even charged yet, right? When Olmert stepped down as prime minister, there was a police recommendation that he be indicted. Netanyahu is far past that stage in terms of when you look at the process of a criminal investigation. Okay, so
Without commenting on how it makes me personally feel to know our prime minister is under indictment, I will move on to another question, which is the corona and the economic and jobs is a very big challenge and should take up most of this government's time, but there are also other important items on the agenda. In particular, the issue of annexation, which Netanyahu is under the impression that Trump is going to help him do, and that because Trump's future is now perhaps questionable, that this must be done very quickly. How do you see the whole question of annexation, what it will do to other good relationships that we've had or have under the radar with moderate countries in our neighborhood, which I think is a positive development of the last several years? What will annexation do to that? And the other security challenges, what's going on in Syria, the relationship with Iran and the Gaza Strip. How do you see this new government approaching those challenges?
Well, I think, with annexation, it's no secret the King of Jordan, King Abdullah, for example, just said the other day in an interview with Der Spiegel that if Israel were to annex territory in the West Bank unilaterally, it would lead to a confrontation with Jordan. And we all know that the relationship between Israel and Jordan is cool at the best of days. But the peace that we have with them, thank God, and thankfully sustains itself. And God forbid we should find ourselves with an eastern front after we have the southern front with Gaza and the northern front with Lebanon and Syria, and the northeast with Iran. Jordan is a close ally and very important for Israeli security. Otherwise, if you didn't have King Abdullah there, you'd have a direct land bridge that connects Iran, Iraq, and Jordan straight into the West Bank. Right? I mean, this is a big problem. By the way, this is the reason, for example, that Israel would have a very difficult time ever withdrawing from a place like the Jordan Valley for that same reason. But you risk the ties with the Jordanians, you risk the ties with the Egyptians, right? You endanger the potential survival of Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, which we could argue, is that good for Israel, is that bad for Israel? But the bigger question is, I think, really needs to be on annexation is, what is the long-term Israeli strategy, right? And this is something that's troubled me for many years. Because when I think about annexation, I look back at the last 11 years. Prime Minister Netanyahu was re-elected as Prime Minister in 2009. We're now in 2020. That's 11 years. It was March 09. We're already at March 2020, right? So he's over 11 years as Prime Minister. In those 11 years, if he wanted to annex, he could have annexed. In those 11 years, if he wanted to really make concessions to the Palestinians that would have brought them to the table and led to potential real, sincere negotiations, right? And I'm not putting the blame on Netanyahu for all those failing. He did the settlement freeze back in 2009 and 2010. He tried to get them to come to the table. They failed. There were prisoner releases and all these different things that happened. But there was a lot more that he potentially could have done. If he wanted to really invest in advancing a two-state solution, he could have taken steps in that direction, but he didn't. So now, why did we never do any of that? Because he never wanted to, right? He never wanted to annex because he's afraid of the ramifications of annexation. He never wanted to embark on a process that would lead to the establishment of a Palestinian state. Why? Because he doesn't want there to be a Palestinian state. Because he's afraid of the consequences of that being his legacy, right? So instead, we've just kind of balanced, and we've gone throughout the status quo for the last 11 years of Netanyahu's term. Now, what's changed now? What's changed now is, number one, is you have, yes, an administration in Washington, D.C., which is more open to this possibility of an annexation than ever before. Although, pay attention, in the last couple of weeks, you have seen comments coming out of the administration. I did an interview with Ambassador David Friedman just 2 weeks ago, where he said that for annexation to move forward, right, because the mapping team is still working on the mapping of the West Bank, and by July 1st, they're expected to be done, and Israel would be able to put forth a resolution to the cabinet for approval to annex. But Ambassador Friedman said we would still need the prime minister of this new government to declare that he accepts the entire Trump deal. Now, remember what's in the entire Trump deal. The entire Trump deal, yes, talks about Israel annexing parts of the West Bank, about 30%, but it talks about a freeze in some of those settlements, and most importantly, it calls for the establishment of a Palestinian state, which is something that, besides for that famous speech in Bar Ilan back in 2009, Netanyahu hasn't really said and hasn't accepted. So that will, I'd be interested to see if Netanyahu was able to make that declaration, right? That's number one. But yes, let's say that the Trump administration is favorable to Israel and will allow this to happen. You know, you mentioned before when we spoke about the evangelicals, and I think that that's definitely true. Trump going into this new election upcoming in November needs to play to his base. And his base are the evangelicals and are his base constituency. I mean, in terms of voters, they are the evangelicals, and he needs to rally them. And one of the ways to do that is to let Israel annex the ancient, historic homeland and birthplace of Jewish civilization. The problem, though, is that right now, what is our long-term strategy? So we annex, and then what? What do we ultimately want? And it's up to us to decide. I'm always thankful to any U.S. administration or any foreign government that comes to Israel and says, listen, we have ideas of what you should do, and here's how we think we should help you. We can decide. You know, we're now on the eve of Yom Yerushalayim, right? In 1967, liberating the city of Jerusalem, conquering the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, the Sinai Peninsula, the Golan Heights, tripling in size of a country. We're 72 years as a nation right now. We are still the most powerful country in the Middle East, right? No matter how you look at it, all the threats that we have, when you think about it, you asked me about Syria, you asked me about Iran, as bad as they are, and as great a threat as they pose to us, Hezbollah with its 130,000 rockets and missiles, Syria, where Iran is entrenching itself and trying to build up fortifications and bases to be able to present Israel with another threat, and Iran with its continued pursuits of a nuclear weapon, and they're working on it, and maybe, God forbid, that they one day should get it. We would have to stop them. But when you look around us, there's not one single enemy that poses a strategic existential threat to the state of Israel. The last time that happened was when Syria had a military. And that was before the civil war that erupted there in 2011. Syria had a formidable conventional military that, yes, could have potentially conquered territory inside Israel. But right now, we have peace with Jordan, we have peace with Egypt. Syria has no military to speak of, completely disintegrated. And Hezbollah, as bad as its missiles could, and as much damage, and I don't want to minimize the value of human life, it will kill people if they fire thousands of rockets into Israel. They can't conquer a single kibbutz along the northern border, and neither can Hamas in Gaza, with all its terror tunnels and all its rockets. So the question is, you have this amazing power. What are you going to do with it? We're going to wait for America to tell us what to do? It's up to us to decide, but we can't decide. And this indecision, I think, personally, is the thing that frustrates me the most. Is what decide to annex, b'vakasha, go ahead and do it. Decide to work with the Palestinians on a two-state solution. Go ahead and try to do it. You have today power that is unprecedented in Jewish history. right? Why are we not leveraging this amazing opportunity that we have?
People are starting to ask questions, and we wanted to say something about Jerusalem. And earlier you asked me basically the same question about Jerusalem. How are we going to decide what we want Jerusalem to be? Some of the themes that come up, and I'll get to the ones in the questions, but that seem to me more significant. What is Jerusalem? It's the spiritual center of 3 religions, at least, and many more subsets and sub-religions, and that's what must be maintained. What I love about Jerusalem is you can travel the whole world just by walking around Jerusalem, or you could at least before the corona, and it will come back again. All of the world ethnic groups and the Jewish ethnic groups, everybody has an outpost here, a museum here, a church here, a synagogue here, every type of religious expression and secular expression, especially more recently when culture has come back to Jerusalem. And that's what makes the place so exciting and what, in my opinion, we really have to preserve. Now, that begs the question, when will tourism come back to Israel and to Jerusalem? Our previous mayor, Nir Barkat, had a goal of getting 2 million tourists to Jerusalem a year. I think he didn't quite make it, but we definitely built a lot of new hotels. Do you have any insight on that, on what's going to happen with tourism?
Well, if I could just say before the tourism, you know, none of my children have gone to the high school, Tehilla or Evelina, but I did have 2 daughters who went to the elementary school, although, you know, you weren't the principal of that at the time. But one of the things that I know that you were, and I say this, by the way, as someone who was on the who was one of the judges for the B'nai Zion Prize, and it was great that you won that year. So, you know, I'm proud to be able to say that I participated in that vote and voted the right way, might I add. But one of the things that I know that you did very well and was very successful at your school was, and fits into what you were talking about before, about the beauty of Jerusalem and this mosaic that you find within the city of religion, of people, of culture, of ethnicities, was the integration that you created, right? Was bringing kids from across the city, from so many different social, economic, religious backgrounds, and merging them and meshing them into one is really the amazing story of Israel, right? When you think about it, a country that kibbutz galuyot brought people together, and that's lived out daily here in Jerusalem. And it's, you know, anyone who's been, I'm sure a lot of people on this call have visited Jerusalem multiple times. When you think about it for a moment, it's almost incredible that the city doesn't blow up on a daily basis, because you have so much tension built in between the Haredim and the Arabs and the secular and the national religious, and everyone vying for their own power. And the Temple Mount, which is this powder keg of explosives just waiting to blow up. But it works, and it manages to work in a way that can only make us proud. So, you know, that itself and your contributions to that is definitely, you know, is worth noting. But when it comes to tourism, this is the $1 million question, right? Or, you know, the 3 million tourist question, because we were so proud of ourselves that last year in 2019, I think we had maybe even 4 million tourists came in last year. As of now, the restriction still stands that Israel does not allow foreign nationals into the country. So even if you have a place to stay, even if you have your own apartment, whatever it might be, you cannot come into Israel because of the continued virus. My guess is only Israelis can come, and they're obligated to enter into 14 days of quarantine. They've lifted the requirement to go into these quarantine hotels. Now you can go into your house or your apartment or somewhere else, but you have to still go into 14 days of quarantine. What's being spoken about is that Israel will make a deal with some other neighboring countries, which also have seen some success in battling with the coronavirus, particularly Greece and Cyprus, which have some low numbers in terms of sick and fatalities and casualties. And therefore, Israelis will be able to go there, Greeks and Cypriots will be able to come here, and neither side, on neither going or coming, will be required to enter any type of quarantine. Going anywhere else, though, you'll still need quarantine. My hunch is that at some point they will lift the ban on foreign nationals. They'll allow them in, but I'm skeptical that they will lift the 14-day quarantine requirement as long as there's no rapid testing capability that you can do before, embarking on a trip, leaving an airport, or entering into a country. As long as they don't have that ability, they're going to have to keep on requiring people to go into quarantine, which is unfortunate. And I have friends who are tour guides who work in the tourism industry. They need to reinvent themselves. Some of these stories are heartbreaking of people who have just lost everything, wiped out. And now they have to find, I think I always think of a friend of mine who is a tour guide, got 4 kids. What does he do now? Right? And he's got to go find a job because forget about the summer. Pesach was killed. The summer was destroyed. No one's even talking about the Chagim that are coming up in September, October. What does a guy like that do to be able to support his family? And that's a true, that's a very complicated reality for many people all over the world.
I want to say something about, in answer to some of the questions about how has this Corona season done anything for the peace process. I don't know about the peace process per se, but there is definitely a different feeling about cooperation between Israel and the Arabs in the West Bank, between Jewish Israelis and Arab Israelis. There are many, many Arab Israelis who work in the health professions, who are being noticed, who are getting a tremendous amount of respect. There is consultation between people in the Bethlehem area and the West Bank area with Israelis, and they have also in Gaza kept their sickness very low. And the very interesting news that started coming out last week, which actually wasn't a surprise to me, about our mayor, Moshe Leon, who has made a major effort to connect to the Arabs in East Jerusalem who are in sort of a limbo of citizenship, but to reach out to them with the help that they need for health. And now moving from that to a new attitude towards the building permits that they need, building classrooms that they need, so much so that he was complimented last week, and somebody said he reminds us of Teddy Kollek. And there were several mayors in between Teddy Kollek and Moshe Leon, perhaps because Moshe Leon is a manager and not somebody who I think is looking for higher office. He is able really to manage his city, and I think there's a very good feeling on all sides because of this. After the fact that there was always passage between both sides of the city, people who work and people who go there and here, but it seems to be getting a very much more positive play right now, and I would certainly hope that that would last. Now, there was a question about the effect of the pandemic on relations between the Haredim and the non-Haredim. And I know there was a lot of news about that, and also in New York. But I think most people understand that even where there were pockets of ultra-Orthodox Jews who seemed to be not observing the laws, they were very small pockets. And the majority of the Haredim of Jerusalem, are in this together with us. I'm in contact with Haredi school principals who are very strict about when their students come back to school, what went on Lag BaOmer. And I think that sometimes that kind of thing, the divide among Jews is overplayed. It wasn't as terrible as one might think. And just in that context, I want to tell something that I haven't told in public at all, that connects to, Yaakov, what you said about my success in bringing different Jewish ethnic groups together, which wasn't necessarily obvious beforehand. Before I came to Evelina, there were sort of schools for Ashkenazim and schools for Sephardim, and we had a school that was for everyone, although I will say, because I know among the people listening, watching here, I'm sure there are some who knew my father, Zal, personally. When my father would come visit the school, he would say, "What do you mean heterogeneity? Where are the boys?" Because to him it looked like if it's an all-girls school, then they must be all the same, and they certainly weren't. 5 years ago, or 6 years ago, Nir Barkat asked me to help him open a new school that was an elementary school called Haredi Mamlachti. That is a national Haredi school. It was a group of families who wanted a Haredi school. It was little girls who wore the blue uniforms of Beis Yaakov, but who also wanted to study math and science and prepare themselves eventually for Bagrut and to go to work. He asked me to give the first grade 2 classrooms and to mentor their principal. We worked with this principal for 5 years. She grew the school from 21 girls to 170 girls in 5 years. Even I couldn't have done that. And then this year she got her own building. And there are more and more pockets of schools like that, boys' schools, that yeshivas that run like yeshivas, but also give bagruyot. Many of them are being supported by New York Federation, and these elementary schools that are starting in a lot of places. This is going to be, I hope, and many people hope, the future of the Haredi integration into the world of Israel that has higher education and the ability to make a living because they can't live on nobody going to work into the next generation. So we were thrilled to be able to help them. And I think out of this corona, I've also been getting some more underground messages about more spin-off schools of this school that are going to start. And I think that's really a very, very interesting development that not a lot of people know about. But the main thing here is that Jerusalem is both the wealthiest city in Jerusalem and the poorest city in Jerusalem. Very wealthy people live here in fancy mansions up and down Emek Rafaim and in other places. And while in Pat and the Katamonim live, I have families who live 5 or 6 children in 1 bedroom. And this combination makes this city, running this city, a very big challenge. The welfare ministry has a very big challenge. The education system in Jerusalem, which has been doing very, very well, and especially during this corona period, has jumped ahead of the Ministry of Education and the services that it's provided for the online learning. But this has to be watched. Keeping the city together, Yaakov, the way you want it to be, requires tending like a gardener all the time. You can't say, oh, now we did it and it's great. It has to be worked on all the time. You have to find the pockets where it's succeeding and copy them. You have to find the pockets where it's not succeeding and help them quietly without a lot of fanfare and without a lot of communication and newspapers that then will make politicians nervous. I think that when we're going into a week of Yom Yerushalayim, when we celebrate the unification of Jerusalem, we have to remember that Jerusalem is a microcosm of what's going on in all of Israel. Zev Elkin says that all the time, and maybe a microcosm of what's going on in the whole Jewish community worldwide in sickness and, please God, in health.
I couldn't agree more.
Okay, so Kenny, are there other questions? Where's Kenny?
I'm here, Bev. I'm here. I sent you a couple of the questions. People talking. There was a question that about the existential threat that's not coming from outside. What do you think the existential threat that's coming from the corruption that you mentioned, having more Knesset members than ever? Everyone is cutting, and the Knesset has raised their own salaries. It seems that the government is looking out for themselves and isn't doing enough for the people. People who came to Israel in the early years as idealists, today they don't know what's going on. Can you give some thought and some of your thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk about that, but just before I do, I want to say one thing about the Haredim and secular divide that Beverly mentioned and someone else had asked earlier. You know, one of the things that Israel's amazing at, and really I think we can take pride in, is that in times of crisis we know how to come together. right? Something that's always amazed me. I came to Israel in 1993. I was then in ninth grade. I was 14 years old. And this was as the suicide bombings were just beginning in the mid-90s. And you know, what blew my mind at the time was that as these buses got, you know, unfortunately, terrible suicide attacks and blowing up, they would be removed from the street 2-3 hours later, and then people would be lining up and driving again and getting on the bus. And that resilience and that fortitude and that ability to get knocked down but get up again was something that I felt was amazingly inspirational, inspiring, but also somewhat unique to the story of Israel and the Jewish people. Is that in face of amazing adversity, Israelis and Jews still know how to plow forward and to see a better future and to work towards it. And at times of crisis, we know how to do that amazingly, right? We know how to come together. We spoke before about how the COVID-19 created this government, right? Without the coronavirus, I don't know that there would be a unity government right now. There probably wouldn't have been, because they wouldn't have had the legitimacy to establish it and to backtrack on those promises that they had made throughout the campaign. But the question is, how do we take this togetherness, this unity, or this sense of unity that we've created now during COVID-19 and catapult it forward to actually impact us as a society? Because there's so much division and there are too many problems. If you look at the last election, 17 months, we had the right wing and Netanyahu negating the Arabs. I was in my office if you've ever driven into Jerusalem and you come up Rehov Yafo, you look to the left, there's a building at the top, it says Jerusalem Post. So we're right near the central bus station. On election day, not in March, but the one in September, Netanyahu comes to the central bus station, gets up on a chair, takes a megaphone, and starts yelling into the megaphone, the Arabs are coming out to vote, I have the numbers in the north. And you're in Jerusalem. You know how many Arabs live in Jerusalem? 250,000. They go in the central bus station too. Right? But that was the narrative throughout all of these campaigns. On the other side, you had Benny Gantz, who was talking about how the Haredim, I will only establish a secular national unity government, not with the ultra-Orthodox. Is that the story of Israel? Is that what this country is supposed to be about? Negating one another, pushing one side away? Or is it about coming together? And I think that that's the real opportunity of this government. And that's why, to the question, Kenny, that you asked before, just now, about the corruption, is that's what's so troubling. Right, is that we have a time, you know, I was speaking with one of my writers today, probably familiar with the name, Herb Kanan. He's a long-term veteran, a reporter and an analyst for us. And I said, whatever happened to just being a Chaver Knesset, a Knesset member? Isn't that something to be proud of? To serve as a parliamentarian in the Jewish Israeli legislature, in the parliament of the Jewish people? Isn't that something that we should all wear as a badge of honor? But it's not enough. It's as if it's not valuable. And everyone wants to be a minister, even if it's the minister of whatever, water or Yad Vashem, or, you know, the settlements, or the minister who connects between the Knesset and the ministries. I don't even know. These titles are just made up on a whim, right? But it's not real. That's not what that's not what a government is meant to do. And I think that, unfortunately, what we have instead is we've lost the focus of what we're supposed to be about, right? And the question is, can we regain it? Can we bring it back? The concern that I have is, because of our political system, or I'm not going to go too much into it, but because of the political system, because of what's coming down the pipeline with the prime minister who's standing trial, who's fighting for his life, what we will see is a continued clash between the different powers in Israel. Between the Knesset, which is the legislative power branch, the executive branch, which is the prime minister's office, and the judicial branch. And we've been seeing these attempts by the Likud party especially, but by the entire right-wing side of the government, to undermine the judiciary, the attorney general, the Supreme Court. It's something that I think we should be a little concerned about. What does this mean for the future of rule of law in Israel? What does this mean for the future of democracy in Israel? I think we have a lot to be proud of. Israel's democracy is vibrant. It's thriving. The fact of the matter is that, yes, in Israel, a prime minister can be held accountable and go to trial. That's not, you know, it's terrible. It's a stain, but it's also something to be proud of, that no one is above the law. And that's something that I think, you know, that's a flip side. It's a different way of looking at it. When we watch the Knesset like we did today, and we see the Knesset members yelling at one another and cursing out the prime minister, whoever's speaking, Can you imagine that happening in Tehran or somewhere in Libya or in Egypt or in Jordan, that they'd be yelling? But we take pride in that, because that is what a vibrant democracy is meant to be. But I think that I'll leave you with just this thought again of, on this occasion of just a few days out from Yom Yerushalayim, it's time for us to make decisions. And it's time for us to take advantage of this amazing opportunity that we have to come together, but to also leverage that power in a way that can bring optimism and a better future to the state of Israel and to the entire Jewish people.
Beautiful. Beverly, do you have anything you'd like to say as we end this wonderful time together?
All right. Yeah, Al, you asked a question about the children and who were out of school and are now back into school. And I'll just say this. First of all, on what Yaakov just said, and I'm glad he said it, because there is a fear that there is a threat to the justice system, to the legal system, that last week we dodged a bullet, that threatening Mandelblit, why doesn't anybody just stand up and say, stop it? So that's another thing that has to be tended very carefully and watched very carefully. But to end on a note of the children who were out of school, as you all are, and who went back to school today under all kinds of restrictions that no principal can really take responsibility for. I will say, because everything I know I learned at Ramaz, I wrote a letter to one of my friends in the Jerusalem Education Authority, because here it's public school, it's not private school. And I said, have you ever thought of the idea of a school nurse? Right, in Ramaz, we don't have a child in the school if there's not a nurse. Here, there's no such thing. But I don't know if you've been reading this, if this got as far as the United States. I hope it didn't. There's been a lot of acrimony about the place of teachers during this crisis because of the unions and because we weren't ready, or not every school was ready with the online learning. And yet, it is so that every teacher that I know and that somebody else knows and that somebody else knows, whether they were able to do the online learning or not, kept in touch with their students, even while their own 4 little children were dancing around their knees, and made a tremendous effort, perhaps less on the issue of curriculum and more on the issue of what we call chosen, of resilience, because a lot of kids have watched their parents lose jobs. It's very difficult to stay home. In America, I know as well, there are issues of family violence, of things that come out when you're stuck in a small place all the time. And I would say that the teachers who kept this going deserve a lot of credit. And I know that the same, I'm sure, is in Ramaz. And you know that my nieces and nephews go to SAR and have been home forever. I think they've forgotten what school is, but they're very, very busy. And this was something that nobody ever heard of, even in Israel during wars. So you would be home for a week or 2 weeks, but this amount of time has been very lengthy. And hopefully this will give, again, as some other examples that we gave, something new and positive will come out of this after Corona. Maybe a little bit different way of looking at differentiating education, of treating teachers, of independent learning. And I have a lot more to say about that, but that can be another topic.
Well, thank you.
I look forward to seeing you all again here in Nachlaot or anywhere else.
And Beverly, Yaakov, we are looking forward to the ability to come to see you. I think it is the greatest desire of probably everyone that's been on today to have that opportunity to be back in Israel, to leave where we're at, and we'll welcome that opportunity in a very, very short time. I want to also just really thank you again for giving us your time and your focus. It's wonderful, as I say, to start the week of Yom Yerushalayim with guests from Jerusalem. Both of you are not really guests. You're really very much part of our community. And so please continue to stay in touch with us. Continue to give us the brachot that you gave us today, and the really sharing all of the knowledge and all of this wonderful warmth with us. You also can join us together with others as we continue our week. Tomorrow night, we have a wonderful program which is entitled Keeping Ahead of the Curve. Dr. Sarah Schlesinger-Hirschfeld, who is going to be speaking with Rabbi Steinmetz moderating, will give an opportunity for you to hear all that's the cutting edge that's happening in looking into the future of what's happening with the COVID-19. She's really on the front line. She's at Rockefeller University and has so much knowledge and that she'll be sharing with us. We'll continue our celebration of Yom Yerushalayim on Tuesday with Rabbi Luchstein's talk. It's entitled The Six-Day War, a Twofold Watershed Moment for the Jewish People. It is something that he has been working on over the past several weeks, something he's working on for many years, but something that he really very much wanted to share with the community. It's something not to be missed, so please share it with your friends and family. We will continue with many other Zooms, which you'll get on emails from us. Thank you all very much for joining us. Wishing you a wonderful day. And as we approach Yom Yerushalayim, Chag Sameach, thank you, Bev. Thank you, Yaakov, so much for being with us.
Thank you all. It means a lot to us sitting here that all of you are interested in what we're doing. It really means a lot from the school and the shul and
for sure.
to the state of Israel, yes.
Okay, take good care. Have a wonderful one. Thanks again.